Okay, I hope that you enjoyed that film starring Timothy Barrett from University of Iowa, and he's going to be retiring. I'm sure he'll still do fabulous work, but I wanted to show you this one book. This is a brand new book by Timothy Barrett that speaks to Western paper making, traditional Western paper making. And it's just full of information, and it's a wonderful book. And if you're interested in a book on Japanese paper making, he has one on that too. You'll go online, you'll see lots of them, but his is absolutely the best, other than the washi book I showed you when we were over at Noguchi. That washi book is very expensive, so I would suggest taking a look at Tim Barrett if you're really interested in Eastern papers or in traditional Western papers. He's a wonderful paper maker, and one of the things that happened over all of this time of paper making is that a lot of people now are making paper by hand. There are little studios all over the world, all over the United States. There's paper making conferences. So you'll see a lot of paper making ateliers or paper making workshops that go in and out of business for this period of time that we're looking at. A lot of folks who I've referred to in the past are no longer in this country. Ken Tyler's operation is in China now. But we do have other fabulous places that are doing printmaking and paper making that are just exceptional. We have Judone Press in New York, and Magnolia in the San Francisco area. So you may want to look at either one of those. They're absolutely wonderful printmaking houses. And I'm starting today in front of this Rauschenberg for a specific reason, but I'm going to talk about one other thing before we dive into the works that are in the Belden collection. Here's an image, and the image is of a mold-made paper-making cylinder. This is what came between the film that we just saw with Tim Barrett making it by hand with a vat and a mold and decal and the slurry in the vat. Between that and the Fournier is this cylinder mold-made paper-making machine. Huge, huge debates over who first invented it. Of course, we have Roberts, who did feel that the Fourniers stole his idea, and his big idea, which we still use today, but changed with everybody's inventions, was the head box. The head box does away with the vat, and it does away with the vat man. You have a box that is suspended over the surface where the paper sheet is going to be formed. That paper sheet can be on a flat, or it can be on a cylinder, as in the image that I'm showing you. That image is of a cylinder that rotates, and the head box would sit over it, and the paper slurry, the fiber suspended in water, would go onto that cylinder, and then it would roll off. So the head box, everybody tried to figure out, once you've got that slurry suspended, what can you put it on to do a bigger production of paper? Now with the hand formed sheets, you have a beautiful distribution of fibers where not any fiber is going in one specific direction. They overlap, they go in lots of different directions, which means that your sheet has a beautiful uniformity and is a better formed and better quality sheet. With the Fournier, what you have is a rolling belt, and the head box is jetting to make paper on a sheet that flows on that belt, which means that the fibers are all predominantly going in one direction. That means you can tear it in one direction easily, like I showed you when we were over with Noguchi. And then if you try to tear it in the other direction, it doesn't tear at all. This cylinder, this mold-made paper, is somewhere in between. You've got that crossing of fibers in different directions, but you're able to make paper quicker than making it by hand. So a lot of the print houses actually get beautiful cylindrical mold-made papers. It's still on a wove screen, but the wove screen is on the cylinder, and you can see by the diagram that there are different decals, different shapes that can go on the cylinder and give you different shaped paper. Ken Tyler, who we've talked about a lot, he actually used paper from one of the mills in Germany, Zepper, which is still in production today, and it's one of the best in the world. So not every handmade paper is going to be by the papermaker printer, which in the Hockneys it's Ken Tyler, and they're forming the sheets. We'll see the same when we go around and we look at Ken Noland. But will, when they go into a production, buy from a house like Zepper that has the cylinder, the mold-made papers. What that gives you also is not only a better quality paper, but the option of having deckled edges, which the Fournier or Fournier doesn't offer you. To have a deckled edge. That's usually a cut edge. Now, one of the other things I'm going to show you very briefly before we go on is this $20 bill. Everybody knows what these look like, and I'm sure you know by now that if you hold it up to a light, you're going to see a watermark in there. There's going to be an image in a blank area that's a portrait. That is created by the paper being thinner in some areas than others. Some it's thick, some it's thin. That's usually been done with a wire on the screen so that when the sheet is formed, the thin areas let more light through and the thick areas do not. So this is made at Crane Paper. Crane Paper makes all the paper for all of our currency. You'll notice that if you leave a dollar bill in your pocket and accidentally throw it in the wash. Let's say you have a Post-it note in the other pocket. So that means, I'm looking right at the light and I should be looking at you. That means if you've thrown the dollar bill in the wash in your pocket and you have a Post-it note in the other pocket, that Post-it note's going to fall apart and you'll look at it and go, wow, what was that? What kind of note did I make myself? And you can't see it, it's not holding together. This dollar bill, or $20 bill as we have here, once that's dry, it's just softer, it's fully functional, and the reason for that is because, as with the Tim Barrett video we watched, it's rag. It's all 100% rag. Crane Paper in Massachusetts, up in the Berkshires, they use rag from the textile industry all over the country. It's 100% cotton, and all of our paper is 100% cotton. They have their own formula, it's not shared, but they used to have a lot of North Carolina textile in there. You can imagine when you're laying up a stack of fabric that has a pattern on top, and you're going to cut around that pattern to make armholes or shapes of legs or whatever you're making. You have that stack of remnant left, and what do you do with that? Throw it away? Crane Paper takes those remnants, and most of you might be familiar with them from the beautiful invitations that they make and stationery that's very finely made. They make that too, but they make currency. And they also print the currency, and they're one of the cleanest paper making, industrially made paper mills in the country because they do not use wood. They use 100% rag, so when you drive through that town, you smell nothing. It's not like most paper making towns that are really smelly from the chemicals used in wood. So Crane Paper, we're very fortunate to have such a clean industry, and they don't fire people. You retire when you're ready if you work for Crane, and everybody who works for them is a stockholder in the company, so I can't say enough about them. Okay, Rauschenberg. We're going to start with Rauschenberg because he worked with Ken Tyler at Tamarind and at other print houses, and eventually worked with him independently. He had a very specific project he wanted to do, and so he contacted Ken Tyler, and the two of them went to the oldest still operating paper mill in France, Richard Dubois, and we have a piece of Richard Dubois paper in this exhibition. Now, one of the things that happened while he was there You'll remember the Hockney paper pools we looked at, and that he formed those shapes of color with tins that looked like cookie cutters. Well, Ken Tyler didn't invent that for Hockney. He invented that for Robert Rauschenberg when they went to France together to go to this old paper mill for this very specific project. So let's go over and take a look at Richard Dubois paper. So here we are with this beautiful little Brock print, and it is on the Richard Dubois paper. If you go online, you can see the mill. Because it's a UNESCO site, it has beautiful exposure online. And you can take a look at the mill. Again, Rauschenberg and Ken Tyler go here specifically because Rauschenberg wants to use flax. He wants to use linen to make this paper. Now, linen has a really high shrinkage, so it's going to react differently from, let's say, a cotton rag, a linen rag, because it's a much longer fiber, and that longer fiber shrinks more. So that might have been something that he really wanted. Beautiful pieces that he did that came out of there. This very soft color, it's not stark white like a lot of the papers we're seeing. It's this very soft, muted sort of beige. That could very well be linen. It doesn't say on the tag what the fiber was, but it does have Richard Dubois on there. And that is not the name of the paper maker again, that is the name of the paper mill, the paper atelier where this was made. Early 1300s for this mill. And they don't use a Hollander beater like what we've looked at either. It's not done in the easy way whatsoever. They still have stamper beaters. There's still a trough with wooden hammers that come down into the trough and beat the fiber for them. So you can see all this. If you were to go there today, you can see an old school operating mill in this place. And their papers are just really beautiful. Tyler and Rauschenberg went on to do more work, but again, that work at this mill is where Tyler came up with making those sort of tin cookie cutouts that Hockney was using to make his entire pool series. So this idea translated for that idea, and the techniques and ways of approaching work change and grow. And we're going to next take a look at Ken Nolan's work, which I'm just absolutely in love with. And I think, unless you have any questions about this, we're going to move on. Okay, so we're over here with the Ken Nolan pieces. And other than the Louise Nevelson, this is the piece for me that is the breakthrough. Ken Nolan believed that the color should not be floating on top or applied on top of a surface, that it was possible for that color to be integral to the artwork, so that the artwork and the support mechanism are one and the same. It's no longer just a support for the artwork, but that this foundation is the artwork as well. Yes, there were other people doing this too, but he really put a very big focus on it. This is so many layers deep. We can see what part of it is the printmaking process, and we can see what part of it is the paper making process. It's a wonderful marriage between the two here. First, we have a base sheet. That's this very, very pale, sort of almost yellow sheet in the background. We have another sheet that's orange that's layered on top of this. Then we have, it looks like, the two together went into a press. And you'll see an image of a press. I've got a little black and white image of a press. So the two of them together went into a press. Then, separate molds, decals, whatever he had to make these two stripes that are pigment. The red stripe and this ochre stripe up here. Those two are pigmented fibers laid on top, and if you look very closely, we're not going to see it, but if you look very closely at the edge, you'll see a little indentation and texture right along the edge of that color. I love that what has happened with this sort of reddish orange, and it looks like a tweed when you get up close on it. There's little ticking of things in there, little remnants that are just thrown in with the pulp. But some of that spills out in almost this little cloud form off of the edges, this very, very thin slurry, this little thin layer of pulp with water that has spilled off and made this cloud pattern. Now we get to what part of this is printed. We're looking at all paper so far. There is a yellow spilling off of this edge, very hard edge of yellow, and then you can see along the edge here that the orange changes. That yellow comes down into here, and then it is here too. So it's blocked out where this same orange of the background sheet passes through top and bottom. These remind me a great deal of Mark Rothko's works too, by the way. He did a whole series of these. So after all the paper is laid on, it goes through the press, and then after it's dried, here comes that layer of yellow printing over the top. There's another image that I'll show you of another piece from this series, and that piece has 6 layers. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 layers. But again, a really beautiful, thick foundation, and the foundation is part of the composition and is the artwork itself. So they're integrated, printmaking and paper making, in this series of works that Ken Nolan has done. Again, his goal to unify those two mediums, the foundation and the artistic surface, to become one. Now, this little piece is probably one of the most challenging. We've got all kinds of paper going on here. His back sheet, this little tan pink back sheet, again, it's at Tyler Graphics in New York. Ken Nolan has his own little embossed sign, so does Tyler Graphics. But this back sheet is made on a laid screen. I don't know if you remember or not, but in our session where we were looking at molds and decals and the hand tools for making paper, and as Tim Barrett used in his little film, the laid screen, the copper or brass woven screen. And you can see the screen lines, very subtle in this back sheet. Then on top of that, we have the next layer, a very thin layer of kozo, as Noguchi used, with some of the kozo threads drifting through. Not quite that dragon cloud, but close enough to be that dragon cloud. And then this very precise printing and leaving areas out. And all of a sudden, with all of this control, all of this really quite controlled surface, here's this little random, just a throw of pulp on there, almost like you're hitting a target. That almost plays into his pop imagery that he was so popular for at one point. But he does this very organic splashing, which lets you know that in this series of prints, they're all going to be different. They're going to have some hand manipulation on them, because you can't do that a second time. You can spatter it on, but it's never going to look like that again. Again, fully deckled edges all the way around on this sheen collade piece over the top. That fusing of two of the papers together during the pressing process, printing process maybe, and beautiful controlled registration. And that's very impressive because of the deckled edges. How do you line that up? And he has beautiful registration on that one. In the center, that blue almost looks like what denim is when you beat denim down and make a pulp or a slurry out of that. And this, almost that pop image, relates to this one. You may think, what are those three doing together? This has in common with this that the printed surface and the foundation for the printed surface are integral to each other. They are just as important. The image and the body are one. But this is more towards his pop subject matter. And here we have right below it one of his pop images. This is offset lithography, which means it's a photographic process. And I don't really know anything about the paper. There's no notation on it other than it's Reeves BFK, which anybody who's a printmaker is going to know that that's usually what you have in a printmaking class. It's a very popular paper. They're still in business under another paper house. I believe that Arches owns them now, or Arch. And so more of a commercial approach, and then this really handmade approach, gently so and blatantly so. And again, I hope you take a look at the other image of the Nolan that's part of this suite with all the color in it that I'm showing you as well. Okay, we're going to look at one more little piece and move on from here. Any questions are welcome. Okay, we're going to wrap up this part of the tour with this beautiful little Peter Milton here. The reason that I'm deciding on the Milton for our last one, and we touched on it with the Ken Nolan that we just looked at, is he has what looks like an Asian paper. And so or an Eastern paper, so we're hearkening back to where we began. And this one is a beautiful blending, marriage again, of Western paper and Eastern paper. It's a chine collé. So we can see the shape of the plate. There's a blind embossing that goes all the way around. The image is on that plate. And the backing is a Reeves BFK, again, a Western paper, formed in a Western fashion. And on the surface, the chine collé paper, the piece that is fused on under the printed plate, or the printing plate, looks like Mitsumata or Gampi, like that very first piece that we looked at in the Belden collection. They're actually almost the same color. This is very thin, but my guess would be a Mitsumata or a Gampi. It doesn't say in the description, but you can easily see where there's a little bit of a hand-formed edge, a little bit of a deckled edge right down along this bottom. And then it's cut, and it's cut, and it's cut, but we have that deckled edge. So that is a hand-formed sheet, and there's a nice mottling that goes on throughout the print. There's a little bit of luster to it, which this being snow would have a little bit of luster. So very flat and absorbent, the background, that's just sucking light in. A little bit reflective for the chine collé part. And my question when I saw this print was, well, if we're looking at snow and you have white paper, why wouldn't you just leave that negative space white like the paper? Well, that's about midday, isn't it? I think this is all about the light at that time of day. You know how sometimes the sky looks a very dense gray, and sometimes that dense gray reflected off the snow is another dense gray? Well, what if you had that dense sky with the sun coming up, but you couldn't see the sun? You can only see the warmth of the sun, or the sun setting, and you can only see the warmth of the sun through that dense snow and dense cloud cover. Well, it might be a little warm like this. He's telling me that we're either looking at dawn or dusk with the sun rising or the sun setting. Now, you may interpret that in a different way, but for me, it takes me to a place of more quietude than a bare, snowy forest normally would. So again, the marriage of the paper and the support for the paper are totally complementary, and neither one would be as strong as the other without the other. All right, so thank you very much. Okay, so we're over here at these Joseph Albers prints. If you don't look at the information to the right here, you say, oh, yeah, that's all part of that series. I get it, that's part of that series. They're all different dates, and they're all different paper. The papers that support these, over here, it just says on paper, on paper, on paper, and then you get Arsh or Arsha's cover paper, okay? And then on board, all right, what does that mean? And then down here, mold-made paper. That's this last one. This is mold-made paper, and that's the cylinder that we were talking about earlier, where you have the head box and it drops down onto a drum, and it's the closest thing between a hand-formed individual sheet and the Fournier made papers. So this would be one of those cylinder sheets. And it's one of the few in the whole exhibition that you can identify as such, because it does say mold-made paper right there. But considering that the background colors are slightly different in every one, isn't it amazing how he could get those colors to sing and play off each other exactly as he wanted, given that different color background and that little stripe that surrounds this cube of the paper color, and him singing to that paper color, and that paper color singing back to his composition.